LOL take two. LOL take two. LOL take two. Now listen. There are certain traditions and customs we have in our lives that, after so many years, become rote. But then something will come out of the blue that shakes them up forever, and you realize they can never be the same. They start all over again, only different. The tradition of doing something special during spring break started as soon as I could travel unescorted by my parents. Senior year of high school, my friend Tony and I took a spring break to visit New York City for the first time. My godfather, who lived in Nyack, arranged for us to stay in Manhattan at the YMCA for cheap. We saw our first Broadway shows, which was thrilling, and explored the sights and smells of the Big Apple. We returned to Iowa a week later with new wave clothes we had purchased in the village, as well as speaking with New York accents that, fortunately, only lasted a couple of weeks. Several years later, as a junior at University of Minnesota, I had produced and directed a production of Grease at the local Jewish community center with my friend Julie. I was in the process of finding myself and thought that perhaps if I got back to the theater, it would help get me back on track. I borrowed $500 from my Uncle Newt, and Julie and I did it all, and the show ran 2 weekends. We had seen a flyer in our dorm for a week's spring break getaway to Daytona Beach for $170. That included your hotel on the beach for a week, daily breakfast, and round-trip transportation. That transportation turned out to be a non-stop bus ride from Minneapolis to Florida. The version of the trip with airfare was out of our price range, and we thought, how bad could a 23-hour bus ride be? Turns out, pretty awful. Our bus driver, Andy, picked up a bus full of college students all ready to escape the Minnesota winter and have a ball. Andy had no fingers on either of his hands, yet managed to drive us all down through 6 states and the Smoky Mountains. Andy announced at the beginning of the trip,
"Now listen, everybody, I don't care if you drink. Just use the bathroom if you have to throw up."
Every single seat on the bus was full, and Julie and I got stuck sitting in front of 2 guys from Duluth who were drinking shots of gin and before each gulp would scream, "Pine needles!" Soon into the trip, the bus bathroom stopped up, and every time we slowed down, liquid poured from the bathroom in the back of the bus and down the stairs in the front of the bus where we were sitting. Needless to say, 23 hours seemed like 23 days. The motel we had been booked at was one of those 2-story horseshoe-shaped motels around a pool, but it was right on the beach. It would have been great, except that Julie and I were also booked into the same room with 4 other girls. We found it a nightmare, and obviously they didn't like us around, and they soon disappeared, leaving the room to us for a week. Most of the other kids were doing the typical spring break things, debauchery and drinking. The week on the beach was just what 2 producers who had just closed a show needed. However, we both called our folks and begged for the money to upgrade to a flight back. They refused, forcing us back onto Andy's bus. One of the highlights driving back was that Andy was stopped in Wisconsin driving our bus 80 miles an hour in a blizzard. Thankfully, we arrived home safely, but I found my dorm mailbox full of bounce check notices from my production of Grease. Had to call the folks for money, and thankfully they bailed me out as they always had. I hadn't discovered Susie Orman yet. That October, my parents came up to Minneapolis, sat me down in my aunt's basement, took many deep breaths, and calmly announced that they were going to be divorcing. After the announcement was made, which really wasn't much of a surprise, further explanation was given. But honestly, after they said the words, "We will no longer be able to pay for you in your schooling," I have little recollection of anything they said. What? No more checks sent to me after a frantic phone call explaining that I had spent my entire quarter's tuition money on Ralph Lauren polo shirts and Bananarama records? No more checks sent to cover the stack of non-sufficient funds notices after my week at Daytona Beach? How dare you, I wanted to scream. What about me? I didn't say that, of course, as oldest child protocol didn't allow it. So I cried. Maybe not for quite the same reasons as my parents thought. My dad moved out that Thanksgiving. I was now working multiple jobs to pay for my schooling, Ralph Lauren polo shirts, and Bananarama records. That Christmas season, one of my jobs was working as an elf at Dayton's department store and herding hundreds of children to the 3 Santa Clauses working simultaneously on the 8th floor. I'll be honest, I wasn't looking forward to Christmas with my family that year. I don't think anybody was looking forward to Christmas that year. Talk about a tradition steeped in emotion. When you're a kid, it's truly a holiday of magic, desire, and wishes, yet only too soon it becomes an annual rite of angst, unchecked expenses, and cholesterol. Still, once a year it rears its head, and as adults, we hope against hope that we can capture just a moment of the magic we had when we were children. Sometimes we do, most times we don't. My brother and sister still lived at home with my mom. My father had moved into a local apartment complex, affectionately known in town as Depression Arms. The fact that it was an apartment with month-to-month rentals and was on the west side of town meant it was inhabited by a plethora of middle-class men who were 1, separated, 2, cheating, and or 3, getting divorced. My mother was acutely aware that this Christmas would be difficult and had planned our whole itinerary. My brother, sister, and I were going to spend the afternoon with my father at Depression Arms, and then we would spend Christmas Eve with my mother, which was the primo booking in our family. Depression Arms lived up to its name. It was dark, had cheap construction and paneling, and was furnished in a kind of Unabomber cabin-in-the-woods style and just this side of the Bates Motel, a perfect match to the moods of its inhabitants. My mother's family had strong Swedish Christmas traditions, and my father was bound to start some new traditions. We were going to have homemade lasagna. Now, just as we were ready to eat, there was a knock on his door. Dad's next-door neighbor was stopping by for his daily dose of commiseration. "Jim, I tell ya, it's so good that your kids are here for you at Christmas. I mean, my kids hate me. My ex-wife hates me. Well, have a Merry Christmas." Our ghost of Christmas cheer then left, and at long last we were able to enjoy the tasty lasagna Dad had made from scratch. We made small talk about my being a Christmas elf and my sister having won a VCR in a hot legs contest at a local bar. It was fine and pretty non-eventful, but when I drove my brother and sister back to Mom's house, I cried, for the right reasons this time. On to Christmas Eve, which was my mother's show, and she had not held back. We had all the traditional family food, korv, which is Swedish potato sausage, as well as Swedish cream covered in fresh raspberries. It was a feast to end all feasts, with my mother putting away a bottle of wine and making many toasts to next year. My sister had brought her current boyfriend from community college to dinner. He was a foreign exchange student from Iran who seemed to have more of an interest in a green card and my sister's new VCR than our Swedish traditions. After dinner, we retired to the basement where my mom had a roaring fire going and the room decorated within an inch of its life. She was out of cigarettes, excused herself, and left us all alone. The dinner had been delicious, but in spite of all her trying, this Christmas was not a barrel of laughs for any of its participants, and there was not a whole lot anybody could do about it. Whoosh! We heard a rustling outside the basement window. Bam, bam, bam! We heard heavy stomping coming down the back stairs. Ho, ho, ho! We heard yelled from just behind the basement door. My brother jumped up to get the door, and in came Santa Claus. Well, okay, it was my mother wearing red long underwear, a fake beard made of a whole box of sterile cotton which could have gone up in flames with one stray ash, a Santa hat, and a bag of presents slung over her shoulder. "Merry Christmas, everybody!" she hollered. I don't think the foreign exchange student boyfriend knew what to make of this, but the rest of us did. Mom was trying her best to be spontaneous and pretend everything was okay, but it just wasn't working. That is, until Hooper, our dog, attacked Santa Claus. There's something about seeing Santa fending off a 20-pound cockapoo that made all anxiety, fears of the future, and angst just melt away, if only for a snowy Christmas evening. Everyone was doing their best that Christmas. Dad, Mom, the kids, and that was enough. We pulled the dog off Santa, and we all sat down to open our presents on this, our new normal, or a first Noel for our family, while Santa settled down with a fresh glass of wine and a cigarette.
LOL take two. LOL take two. LOL take two. Ba 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 bum.